Now that I think about it, all history is just one big trust me, bro. You know, even with cameras and recordings and stuff like that, and now that we're just now getting advanced with especially time capsules. Ooh, man. Motherfuckers really need to know. They really need to know about the future or the past. And the present just so happens to be the in-between stuff. You know, it's whatever the current thing is, the current day, whatever your current day is. But yeah, history is really just all a trust me, bro. You know, because people try to say, oh yeah, the white man, the Christopher Columbus was uniquely evil and they should have guilt for it. You know, have collective guilt because they need this and this and this that they did hundreds of years ago. First of all, those people are dead, and they've been dead for a long time, so you can't really go after them. And then you can't really go after the people of today, because yeah, there's racists or whatever, but that's every race, okay? If racism to you means prejudice plus power, then that means me as a white man, yeah, I have some racism shield that protects me whenever a bullet gets shot so I don't get shot. Yeah, that's how that definitely works, bro. Like, I get that you was kings, you know, back in the day. You was kings and shit. We was kings and shit. But that was back in fucking Africa. Okay? If you want to be the black guy about it. But you know what I find weird? They're like, oh yeah, trust me, bro. We had great civilizations before the white man came. But it's like, dog. Don't be like, oh, but they had brown people in Europe before Europeans were white. We were the true Africans. We were the true Europeans. No, you had a bunch of Northern African motherfuckers who had white skin. They weren't like European quite yet, obviously, because, well, people had to, you know, get to Europe and all. But they went through basically Asia and through the seas and shit. And eventually, those white-skinned people, throughout thousands of years of history, became the Europeans, or would eventually become the Europeans once they did separate into their own cultures or whatever. But guess what? Africans enslaved other Africans. You know? And they're like, but not all Africans did that. Not all Africans are... there was no Africans that enslaved their ancestors, that enslaved their relatives. Yeah, not all of them did it. Not all of them. But a lot of them did, you know? Like, they try to deny that history because, they have dark skin, so they must have been innocent. Or, oh, they have dark skin, so they must be indigenous. Just because a motherfucker has dark skin doesn't automatically mean that they're native to an area, okay? Because if the Europeans were the first ones to arrive to the Americas first, before what they call the Native Americans, guess what? They would be the natives. They would be the indigenous. But they don't want to go, but they were innocent. They had, you know, this and that. And it's like, no, I don't think the Aztec were super innocent, okay? Don't get me wrong. I think what the Europeans did was bad, but they just so happened to join in on the violent fun, you know? Like, duh. You know, they were already colonizing each other, you know, going crazy. Yeah, they might have been a peaceful tribe here and there, but there were many tribes who viewed the continents, the lands, like it's ocean. You know, like dry ocean, like land ocean, basically. And they would just fucking dominate all over the place. But because Europeans had more advanced technology, and because they tended to use, well, stronger tactics, eventually, over the course of a few centuries, when they did eventually start colonizing, they started going cuckoo crazy. But here's the thing. It wasn't just, purely disease or their might. There were a lot of tribes that were like, they will sell a soul for another soul. You know what I mean? Like, they will literally just take their relative, take whoever they don't like, or another local tribe, and just be like, you see this motherfucker? Enslave him. You know? Like, that's what they would do. Literally. And they try to portray them as, like, these innocent brown people. You know, like, oh, yeah, they're all brown, and they name every plant and flower. They name every tree and bunny and rabbit they see in the woods back then, until the evil white man came. Like, no. Both sides did shit to each other and themselves. Okay? Like, oh, yeah, they were burning fields back then. Yeah, that's because a lot of indigenous groups used that to exploit other tribes so that way they could try to take over an area and colonize and shit, okay? They just so happened to come in earlier, you know? Same thing with a lot of parts of Africa. Same thing with a lot of, Oceania, South and North America, obviously. But a lot of places in Europe, you know? And the only real indigenous people are the ones in, like, the southern half of Africa. And even then, there's, like, hundreds of years of them colonizing each other long before, thousands of years, of them going after each other, having crazy history. Because, it's Africa and all, like, they're literally where the modern human anyway, comes from, I mean, yeah, there were other groups similar to humans that went out like millions of years, or at least thousands of years, before humans ever did. Humans started stretching out to other parts of Africa. But it's like, motherfucker, once we did finally stretch out, and once some civilizations went over this way or that way, it was crazy. But then it's like, on the other hand, when it comes to the evolution, for example, people were like, oh no, this race was still evolving. But then it's like, so is your race, But today we detect it as a racism. But like back then that was viewed as like genuine science because, well, they just didn't know shit as much, and so they just put whatever ideology they agreed with because, that's the narrative that it fit the most. That kind of thing. Like, they didn't hate science, they just didn't like the fact that science didn't fit their narrative. If you know what I mean. Doesn't matter if they were Christian, Muslim, Hindu, Buddhist, whatever, atheist. It didn't 100% approve of the binary code. By that I mean, like, the brain. Like, it didn't approve with the way that they thought, in their lifetimes, whoever they were, historically. And, there's a lot of things you can get on with, nature history, element history. Tracking the history of history has its own history. It's rule 100 of the internet. If it exists, it has a history. So, yeah. Whoa. And, one of the big things is there's a lot of people. There's a lot of goddamn people. And I really think that they're lying about the numbers. I really think that they're either completely underestimating or overestimating, And I don't know which countries to be specific, but probably the ones with the bigger population. They're probably either adding too many people or they're adding not enough people. Because there are just some people that never get counted, or there are some people who get counted more than once. So, yeah, and then there's death. What is death? We know you're not alive anymore, but where do you go? I don't know. I don't fucking know, because it's all just one big trust me, bro. Okay? Could be hell, could be heaven, could be nothing, could be nirvana, could be fucking telekinesis bullshit, and you somehow end up in the shadow realm. I can't tell you nothing about it. I mean, it's not like to say that the past didn't happen or that the future hasn't happened yet. You know, obviously the present is just whatever's currently happening. The past is the past. The future is the future. The now is the now. Whatever now you're in. But here's the thing. Whatever now you're in is constantly changing. So there's just more added to the past, but yet to have been added to the future. So you're just taking whatever the future has, your immediate future has, turning that into the present. But when you turn that into the present, it instantly goes to the past. Instantly. Or even earlier than instantly, just immediate now. You know? But you don't have to worry about the obvious immediate now on every single topic or every single thing, obviously. You know, you don't want to be like those prison guys who are like, what if you... because they ate breakfast that morning. What if you ate breakfast today, but you didn't have any breakfast tomorrow? But they're like, but I had breakfast today. They're talking about you having breakfast tomorrow. If you had no breakfast tomorrow, what would you do if you didn't have it tomorrow? You dumbass. Not today, not yesterday, tomorrow. Okay? Because tomorrow is the most important one. The second most important one was what happened in the past. And the third one is whatever the current one now is. Unless you're in an emergency situation or some bullshit like that. But look. All of human history that we know of, you know, that we could know of. Now that I think about it, there are certain things that are probably being taught about history that will be lost to history at some point. You know? Like, you could make a 9/11 joke about that, but... Well, I was going to make a 9/11 joke about this, but I forgot. So... Bombing on me, but hey, at least my mailbox ain't gonna blow up or my shoes ain't gonna blow up or something like that. It goes crazy. And people are like, oh, but what about the Aztec? What about the Ottoman Empire? What about the Greek Empire? What about the British Empire, the Portuguese, the French, the German, I guess Dutch, but the Spanish, the Portuguese, I think I already said that. Those countries colonizing. What about the Roman Empire? World War I and II. The U.S. Civil War. The American Revolution. Okay? The American Rebellion. Okay? People like to talk about how, the post-World War I era was when everybody was at peace, when everybody was, done with the war, and they thought, they started opening borders, and they thought everything would be good. They should really call it the optimistic age, Because people were super duper optimistic, and they really, really fucking thought it wasn't really nothing gonna happen. It started in the end of World War I, in the beginning of World War II, in the last year of World War I, in the first year of World War II. That was the post-World War I era. And during this age, they just did not think about it. And then eventually, Hitler rose to power in his Nazi movement. Well, he eventually formed the Nazi movement, and then he rose to power and became the main face of the movement. But he didn't go full dictator mode until a couple of years earlier. And then eventually, he got so powerful, he was like, fuck it, I declare war. And then, bada bing, bada boom, that became World War II. And then after that, you had some bullshit in the 50s, with crackheads. Then you had the 60s and the 70s. I think it was with Vietnam. And then you had the 80s and stuff, 1984, the literal year, stuff like that. The Islamic Revolution of Iran. Then you had the 90s with the Berlin Wall falling, the USSR turning into like 15 countries at the time, which I think now is like what, 23 in the potential future? I don't know. I'm not from that part of the world. And then, you know what happened? U.S. was almost in a civil war in like 1995 L.A. riots. People was going crazy and shit, but conspiracy theories were just like disappearing off the ground because they thought it was all good and usy. New century came around. Motherfuckers saw 9/11 happen, and for like at least a month, at least what they say anyway, I wasn't alive during that time, motherfuckers just crashed the fuck out, and conspiracy theories just ballooned. Now everything became a conspiracy theory. And you know who was the master of conspiracy theories? You know who went from being kind of niche and actually losing relevancy to becoming the most relevant guy in the entire world when it comes to conspiracy theory? The god of conspiracy theories, of modern, current day conspiracy theories, if you will. Especially for ones in the far distant future. Alex Jones. The alcoholic. The thinking their frogs are gay guy. He was a trust me bro individual. And it worked because of 9/11. You know, and then you had some other shit go on in the 2000s with certain individuals. And then you had 2009 to about 2012. You know, that was when YouTube went from being like kind of known and kind of like being one of many of the big, it went from being one of the many big platforms on the internet to being the biggest platform on the internet. And I want to say from about 2012 to 2016, that's when YouTube went from being the biggest platform on the internet, for at least for a brief time being the only biggest platform on the internet, at least for a brief time. And then 2016 came around and there was a whole bunch of other shit going on, but still, not a good year. It was not a good year. And then there was 2017, good year, fidget spinner year. If you know anything about 2017, it was specifically the year of the fidget spinner. I don't know why I remember that, but I just do. 2018, it was existing. 2019 was 2019. You had Endgame, you had, what was it called, Game of Thrones ending, and then you had all the other stuff going on like war, but whatever. And then you had, you know, actually in 2016 they had a lab leak, but in like 2017, 2018, the disease got really bad with the animals and really bad with the people, and then all of a sudden 2019 they had a huge pandemic for China. And then, you know what happened? It started affecting the rest of the world, and so by the end of March, they said it was just going to be 2 weeks, bro. 2 weeks. And then that became like a 2-year COVID pandemic. And that changed everything. And we only got a taste of what it could potentially bring in the long term. Was saying, then you had a couple of years, another election, then another election, then you had 2025 with Charlie Kirk shooting, then you had 2026, which is the year I posted this video on, and you all know what happened in 2026. And I'm not gonna spoil it because I know the motherfuckers are just gonna look it up anyways. Cause you know, history, lore, and stuff. And also all the other future years I didn't mention because, well, it hasn't happened yet, at least not for me, but probably for you. Anyway, I am out of here.